Great to have you here. Finally, we're doing the podcast.
Yep.
Do you want to start off by telling us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure, I'm Julie Norman. I'm an executive head teacher of the Quantock Education Trust in Somerset. It's an executive primary lead position where I look after the primary schools. And I'm also the director of SOS, School Omega Solutions.
Brilliant. Okay. And so what did you want to talk about today?
I think we should talk about Ofsted. And the reason I think we should talk about Ofsted is because it's an everyday kind of fear that head teachers have. There are a lot of myths around it. And I think that after some experience and some knowledge I've gained over the last couple of years, I could offer some advice and some support and just help empower head teachers really to go into their inspections with some confidence in themselves. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were a head teacher yourself for 6 years and you were senior leadership for 15, is that right?
Yeah, so I've been a senior leader for 15 years, as you say, but I became a head teacher 6 years ago, and looking after 2 schools as an executive head was my first post as a head teacher, which meant I get the joy of having 2 inspections instead of 1.
Okay. So what made you want to go out of the classroom and into the head teacher position?
I really loved teaching and it was all I ever wanted to do. The dream was to be a teacher. I knew I wanted to be the teacher I never had. I didn't have particularly good teachers. And I always wished I'd have a good teacher who would say, "Are you okay?" And unfortunately in those days they didn't do that. No. So I thought, right, I'm going to be that teacher. I'm going to be that one who looks for the child in the morning and very quickly establishes what their needs are for the day. And I loved being a teacher. And I think because of my passion and it being everything I always wanted to be, I ended up being quite good at it. But of course, the danger in my profession is when you're good at something, you get pulled out to teach all the others how to be good. So I went into senior leadership to lead teaching and learning as a deputy role. Which meant I did very little teaching and I was supporting all the other head teachers to be great at what they do. And I really enjoyed it, but I really felt that as a school, the senior leadership team were making decisions that were very driven around senior leadership needs and not the needs of the children.
Right.
And to influence that, I had to be a head teacher.
So you wanted to make effective change, and so you were kind of pushed into more and more senior leadership.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a maverick. I'm a little bit of if something don't work, fix it. And I always ask myself, why do we do it like that? Which made me very irritating as a child to question everything. But I think as a leader, questioning everything is a good thing because you say, actually, if that's not fit for purpose, why are we doing it like that? And the problem is I do a lot of that. So I change quite a lot because most of our education system is set up for the 1850s, really, or 1950s in some cases, and definitely not the 21st century. So for me, I think there is so much work to do to get education into the 21st century. I was only ever going to have a voice as a head teacher. It turns out that, I did have a voice, I did make a lot of changes, but then I had people saying, can you come and do that for our schools? And again, if you do something that other people like, you get pushed up the ladder. So, so I became an executive head of 4 schools and decided the first 2, I'd already created the culture I felt was fit for the 21st century. I'd created the curriculum fit for the 21st century. The staff were very capable of embedding it. And they didn't need me as much as some other schools. So I moved on and now I'm working with other schools.
Right, okay. Yeah, so what sort of thing are you doing at the moment then?
Well, the thing is, if you do things slightly differently, this is one of the reasons I want to talk about Ofsted tonight, because if you do things a little bit differently, the problem is they go into hundreds and hundreds of schools and they see exactly the same thing. So when they see something that's a little bit different, they'll either love it or they'll hate it. It's a bit of a Marmite situation. And I had an Ofsted inspection where the Ofsted inspector, I wasn't like all the other schools, and he didn't like that. So So he immediately started making judgments on the school within minutes of arriving, which he shouldn't be doing, and it certainly doesn't represent Ofsted and what they would expect. So so it was a very difficult inspection. And I realised afterwards, one of the reasons is because he came in and he had an idea of what he was going to see, and it wasn't what he thought. So that threw him, and then his behaviour sort of represented his confusion around what I was offering. So so we had a very difficult inspection, let's say. And from that, I've supported a lot of head teachers through inspections, because actually, as head teachers are beginning to change their schools to suit their community and the 21st century, those inspections can get quite tricky. And what I want to bring to head teachers is to empower them to go ahead with those changes. You know,
Right, okay.
we will fight the 1950s. We will fight the inspector who's stuck in the 1950s, and we will work with Ofsted to improve education, you know.
There's this kind of, I find there's a bit of a divide between teachers and Ofsted. Are you really trying to bridge that gap?
Definitely. I mean, it often is the case that people think schools and Ofsted don't like each other. What it is, I think, is a lot of head teachers fear Ofsted because they're never really sure what's going to happen. They hear stories about Ofsted inspections, and they're so different. One would think there's a multitude of guidelines and they're all using different ones. And it's actually not the case. There's one set of guidelines, one framework that we all work to. And what I think is our fight is not with Ofsted as an institution, as you know, a business, not at all. Our fight is with those inspectors who come in prejudging your school. They've already made up their mind before they've walked in the door, and they have some, let's say, habits from past. They haven't moved forward with the new framework. And our job as head teachers is to insist that they do, and that they work in partnership with us, not work against us.
Okay, so what you mentioned this difficult Ofsted inspection. What went so wrong?
Yeah, it was going to be my first ever inspection as a head teacher, so I was really excited. I've always wanted to do an Ofsted inspection as a head teacher.
Not weird, but okay.
Yeah, yeah. Well, then I was that student at university who absolutely loved exams, so I would just get so excited for them. I just love the pressure, you know, of we are now going to pick your brains and you have a choice here, impress us or don't. And I just love that challenge. So for me, it was finally I've got, you know, an audience, a captive audience who want to hear me talk about my school all day long. Who doesn't want to do that? We all want to talk about our school. That's all we want to talk about. So it was a joy. I was really excited and thought this is fantastic. I get to talk about my biggest interest all day. So he turned up an hour late, so he didn't arrive till 9 o'clock to start with. So he was quite flustered. He didn't have any of the paperwork he should have had. He didn't have a register of the children that I'd already sent. He hadn't read any of the material I'd sent him, and he openly admitted that. And so he just wanted to get going as quickly as possible. Well, the concern with that is we hadn't really sat down and agreed how the day was going to pan out, what the day would look like. And that's really vital before you start an inspection. It's really important that both parties sit down and say, what's the day going to look like and what do we both want to get from it? And I didn't have the opportunity to do that. So I was very unsure what he was expecting to gain from the inspection. And clearly he had no idea of what I expected to gain from it. So it was quite a higgledy-piggledy start. He went to the reception teacher and immediately told her, your teaching is the problem. He hadn't actually seen her teach yet. So by 9:10, she was furious. They were having an argument. And he basically said, you're the reason your school fails in phonics. Wow. Well, we're 100% pass rate. So in phonics, consistently year on year, you know, we were doing very well in phonics. So that confused me because I thought, how can our phonics be bad if we keep passing? So I did ask him what he thought we could improve on. You know, how can we improve on 100%? I'd be really interested to get that feedback. And I wasn't being defensive. I was quite intrigued as to why he felt 100% was failing. So he insisted that our phonics was our weakness. And then he demanded the teacher teach a phonics lesson right there. You don't do that. That's not acceptable. So she was close to tears because she was now really stressed.
I bet.
And he kept saying in front of all of the children, go on then, teach, and I'll show you what you're doing wrong. And that's unacceptable. That's
So she must have had her back against the wall from the very start, really.
completely.
Yeah.
So the inspection really wasn't going quite as planned to start with. That was 9:10, and we were already in a situation where there were tears, there was stress, there was fear. And as a head teacher, I had to stop and think, you know, do I let this carry on? I'm meant to look after my staff. I'm meant to look after my children. But for a moment, I was like, I don't know what I do. What do I do now? You know, do I say something? And I think any head in that situation would have the same fears. In our mind, you know, fresh thinking, when we wake up in the morning, we think, yeah, I'd say something. But when you're there in that moment, that the world kind of, it slows down and goes into slow motion, and you think, what do I do? So I wanted to address it, but I was quite nervous about addressing it so early on. And I thought, okay, well, perhaps it's because he was late and he's rushed in, and let's give him the benefit of the doubt, and let's just go with the flow. So I said to the teacher, you don't have to teach. And she said, no, I'm going to teach, and I'm going to show him how good we are at phonics. And I thought, atta girl, that's the fighting spirit. That's what my schools are about. We are fighters. And it just went from bad to worse after that. That was probably the best part of the day. So he asked a mute child to read to him. And we explained, and I'm the Senko, and I explained this child's mute. He doesn't talk to anybody. And he still insisted, get me that boy, and read. No, please, no, thank you. Just kept pumping the book with his finger, saying, read that. That's immense fear for a child with such high anxiety.
Yeah, no.
He went into the year 2 class and said, which one of these is disadvantaged? It's well agreed in the code of conduct, you don't do that. So I said to him, I gave you a register. It's quite clear next to their names what category they fall under. He said, I don't have it, so just tell me, is that one disadvantaged? And I said, I can't really answer that. All the class were staring at me, and they started to look around. Am I disadvantaged? Are you disadvantaged? And then it got to the point where he was getting frustrated, so he just pointed and said, what's that? And I said, that's a boy. And he said, well, I know it's a boy, but is it disadvantaged? And I said, he is not disadvantaged.
Oh, wow.
And at that point, I'd had enough. So I did give him his warning. I started to think logically, and I thought, okay, Julie, you're the head teacher. Everyone is looking at you saying, do something. You can't let this carry on. And they were absolutely right. But, you know, the everyday Julie was going, wow, what do I do? And the head teacher, Julie, was like, I have to do something. I can't sit back and watch this. So I did take him to the office, and I gave him a fair warning that his conduct wasn't good enough. He wasn't meeting their code of conduct. He wasn't meeting my code of conduct, and he wasn't following the framework. So on all of that basis, I was giving him a polite warning.
And what time was this?
10:30.
Wow.
I struggled to 10:30, and he got his warning. He apologised and said it was probably because he had come in late and he was flustered, and he would pull his behaviour together. I did have the code of conduct in front of me, and I had the framework and handbook in front of me. And that was most important, because it was a clear indication to him, I know the rules of the game. Don't mess with me, okay? I can play this game just as well as you can. So if you break the rules, I'm going to spot it straight away. And I think that was absolutely key. I think that was when the penny dropped for him. I know what I'm talking about. You've broken the rules. I'm now, in the lead here. I'm now in charge. And he did apologise and said he would check his behaviour. So that was fine. As far as I was concerned, it was over. We were going to get crack on and have a really good inspection. I asked him to have a great inspection with me. I was really looking forward to it. Let's enjoy it, But unfortunately, his behaviour didn't change. So by 12 o'clock, that behaviour continued throughout with all of the children, right up to year 6 children. Is that a disadvantaged boy? And you don't say that in front of year 6s, it's just appalling. It's just shocking, really, the things he was saying. So after lunch, I sat with him and I said, you've had your warning. I was really very clear that you're not following the code of conduct. You do not represent Ofsted. Today, you have not represented them. You've represented your own requirements, needs. I don't know what your agenda is, but it certainly isn't what Ofsted would expect. And so asked him to finish the inspection and leave.
You asked Ofsted to leave?
Yeah.
I didn't think you could do that.
Turns out you can. I didn't. However, I was very mindful of the fact that it was a safeguarding issue. The children were quite frightened of him. One girl cried as soon as he asked to speak to her, but she had watched his behaviour, and it didn't surprise me that she cried. Children were frightened of him. They weren't frightened of an inspection, because the children at my schools, weren't precious in that way. Tough little cookies. However, they were frightened of him, and that, as a safeguarding lead, I have to respond to that. But the teachers were also feeling emotionally and professionally very, very vulnerable. So as a safeguarding lead, I had to ask myself, if a visitor came into our school and put everyone in that position of feeling vulnerable and frightened, or it would be my responsibility, of course it would, to ask them to leave the premises. Why? And go so far as ban them from entering the premises again. So I thought, well, why should that be different? For an inspector, he's just a person at the end of the day doing his job and not doing it properly. So
you make a fair point. I mean, if he's not carrying out his duty, you at least have a duty to carry out yours.
Exactly. And what we say to the children all the time, don't we? Don't ever change your behaviour on the back of somebody else's. So because he's breaking all the rules, it doesn't mean I have to. So I still followed protocol. I still followed the rules of the game. I still followed the code of conduct. I was perfectly polite. And also, as a safeguarding lead, I followed my responsibilities and asked him to leave the building. I also made it clear to Ofsted he's banned from the building. He'll never be allowed to enter again.
Wow.
So I just followed my duties, and I'm glad I did. To this day, I don't regret it.
Absolutely. I mean, what was his reaction to that then? Because I imagine it's kind of unprecedented. It doesn't happen very often, and he probably didn't see it coming. So how did he react to that individually?
Well, he was very surprised. I think he'd fallen into a pattern all day of just speaking quite rudely to people. So he was really surprised when I said it. But he also got quite defensive and said, "You can't ask me to leave. You don't have the right to do that. I'm here on Her Majesty's service." And I said, safeguarding trumps the Queen, I'm sorry. So, and it does, safeguarding of children will trump anything. So he can call himself whatever he wants to call himself. He was causing real upset within the school. So I had to act. I still insisted the inspection had finished, and I wouldn't be taking part in any more conversations with him. He was no longer welcome in the classrooms or near the children, and so he needed to pack his things together and leave, which he did. Okay,
right. So I can only imagine there was repercussions. What was the first thing going through your mind after you'd kicked Ofsted Inspector out?
Well, the first lesson from all of this that I would say to any head teacher watching this podcast, or any senior leadership member, the first thing I would say is always ask yourself, what's the worst that can happen? Okay? What's the worst that can happen if I stand up for myself? Okay? Because someone's breaking the rules, someone's not following procedure, I can't continue with this, and if I do, I'm also breaking procedure, and I'm carrying out an inspection that's not right. So what's the worst that can happen if I walk out on this inspection and say it's not happening? Right. And I did stop and think, what's the worst that can happen? And for me, the only thing I could think of that was the worst thing was I'd probably get sacked by my governors, okay, or the local authority for throwing out an Ofsted inspector. So I did stop and think, right, what's the worst thing that can happen? And I thought, actually, likelihood is the worst thing that can happen is I'd get a Section 5 inspection. And this was a Section 8 inspection. And I thought, do you know, I think I'd prefer a Section 5 inspection, which is a full inspection where they look at everything. Whereas the Section 8 inspection, they just look at 3 things and that's it. And I thought, no, I'd prefer a Section 5. And actually, if I got the sack, I would give up my job to protect the staff and children from being bullied. So it was a no-brainer. He was going. Absolutely. And I was going to take the risk. So what happened? So the senior HMI, and for SLTs out there, the senior HMI oversees the inspectors. And it's the inspectors who go back to the senior HMI with their findings to put their report together. The senior HMI called me the next morning, soon after I received a huge bunch of flowers from my governors, telling me I was amazing. So I knew they were on my side, and that was great. We needed to be really united in our ethos and culture at our school and our safeguarding responsibilities. So that was fantastic. So the senior HMI called me the next day, and he said, I think we need to talk. And literally my heart sank and my stomach turned, and I felt sick because I thought I'm probably in a lot of trouble right now, but I don't even know what trouble, because I've never seen this done before, so I don't even know what trouble I'm in. And he just said, he said he didn't want to be patronising, but he wanted to say he was proud of me and well done. And I was shocked. Wow. I didn't expect that at all. But what he said was, if more head teachers did this, if more head teachers upheld the framework, the code of conduct, and actually demanded that the inspectors follow Ofsted's own culture and ethos and guidelines, maybe inspections would be a lot better and they'd be more in partnership. So they actually appreciated the fact that I threw him out. They appreciated it because they said, wow, you want him to represent Ofsted, and we appreciate that was your expectation of him. So I had their full support.
Excellent.
Yeah.
That's great.
Everyone supported me, which I didn't really expect, to be honest. But it did stop me and made me think, how many head teachers out there know that you can do that you can stand up for your school, you can stand up for the Ofsted framework, the Ofsted Code of Conduct, your school's Code of Conduct, your safeguarding responsibilities. I mean, how many people know that that's actually the right thing to do and not the wrong thing? He was clear in telling me I didn't have the right to do that. And he was wrong to give me that advice, because that wasn't true. I did have the right to stand up and take action.
So if you could offer advice to head teachers or senior leadership today about your Ofsted experience, about their Ofsted experience, what would be the first thing you'd say?
Okay, the first thing I would say is read the framework, read the handbook, read the code of conduct, read your own code of conduct. Know exactly what everyone's going to be doing, know the steps that are going to take place during the day, and frame your whole day around that. Okay, your expectation has to be that your inspector is going to do exactly the same thing. So your two processes will meet in the middle when you talk on the phone the night before and when they come in. You'll have a very clear idea of that initial conversation you have. It's really very clear in the framework that in the handbook, that you will set out your day. That is the first job, is to set out your day, who's going to do what and when. And that's most important, because you may need to get cover for certain classes, move people around. So this is really important. And if the inspector doesn't do that, you now can't function as a head teacher and prepare staff and prepare children, because you don't really know where he's going to be going when. So that's really important. So that would be my very first piece of advice. My second piece of advice, which I think is even more important, if it's not going well, if you're feeling flustered or you're feeling worried, or you think that someone's not following the handbook properly, the code of conduct isn't being followed, you need to stop the inspection. You must stop the inspection. Wow. And I'll explain in a moment why that's really important. But remember when I said that I gave him a warning, a polite warning at 10:30 in the morning, that has to be noted. Note that you had that conversation. Ask him to note, or her to note, that you've had that conversation, that you have been feeling really upset with how the inspection's been going. And then give them a warning. But you cannot be emotional about this. This is not about emotions. You will feel emotional because you'll be feeling very frightened and hard done by. But actually, you mustn't get emotional. Your warning, your polite warning to the inspector is completely based on the code of conduct and the handbook. So you will say, I am feeling uncomfortable because it clearly states this in the code of conduct and it clearly states this in the handbook. And that's not happening. So I'm feeling very uncomfortable. Okay, I'm unhappy with the way the inspection's going, and I'd like us to review the paperwork before we continue. And then just note that, okay? So what you don't want to do is say, I don't think you're being fair, you're being really harsh on us, you're upsetting everybody, you're upsetting me, and I'm not happy with what you're doing. Okay, because then what they'll see is someone beginning to get quite emotional, and it's all about how people are feeling. And I'm sorry, but a polite warning can't really be based on your feelings. He's not responsible for how you feel and how you emotionally respond to situations in your life. That's not the inspector's responsibility. It is, however, their responsibility to follow the paperwork. So that's what you use. Now, that's really important, because if you do get to a time where you have to stop the inspection again, it is the second time that you would ask them to leave the premises. Okay, but I would not do that without having given them a polite warning first to change the behaviour.
Okay, so the warning isn't quite important here.
It's actually really important, because the inspector at no point then can argue that they were completely blindsided, they were lulled into a false sense of security, you were saying everything was fine, so it came out of nowhere. I told her key stage 2 results aren't good enough, that's why she behaved the way she did. Well, actually, the warning eliminates all of that nonsense. So you must have the warning, okay? So those are a couple of pieces of advice I would absolutely give. The other thing I would give is all the paperwork that you give to the inspector the night before that they ask for, or in the morning they may ask for some paperwork to review, like your data, or they might want to see some policies or anything like that. They might want to see your SEF and things like that. Keep a copy of everything you gave them and note that you gave it to them, because some inspectors can say they didn't receive that information, and so therefore they weren't aware of your great grades in maths. They hadn't noticed that. So be very clear what you've given, because when I did remind the inspector of the paperwork I had given him and told him, oh, well, then you will have read in my data that we get 100% in phonics. So I'm confused why you're saying phonics is our weakness. So can you tell me what you read in the SEF or in my data analysis that makes you feel that phonics is a weakness for us? And that's when he admitted he hadn't had time to read it.
Okay.
Right. So now I have an argument, because actually he hasn't followed protocol.
Yeah, that certainly gives you the upper hand in the situation.
Yeah.
If he hasn't done his homework, you have.
Yeah. And this is stopping, inspectors making these snap judgments, and they come in already having an idea in their head of where you are, based on something else they've read. Whereas you could have turned that school around in the last year. You could have, really worked hard to move even one subject forward. And if the inspector doesn't read that information you sent, they won't know that. They might go on the last inspection, or your data from 2 years ago. So it's really important you check that they read it and they understood it.
Right, I see. So the SEF is incredibly important. Knowing your stuff back to front, and that way that kind of stops you from getting bullied as such.
Well, the whole inspection, I think what people fail to realise sometimes, and this is all stuff I've just learned over time, people think that Ofsted come in, have a look around, and then judge the school. In fact, that's not what happens. What Ofsted claim to do, and I believe in most cases it is what they do, is they read your self-evaluation form, your SEF, what you say about your school. So you've judged your school, not them. They're just agreeing or disagreeing.
Right.
So if you've said in your SEF, we are good in all these areas, they will then come and say, okay, well, we don't disagree with the good. We would agree with you. So you've given a really good, accurate self-evaluation of the school. Or they'll say, we disagree with your good. We think it's outstanding. So we're going to come back and try and find some evidence of outstanding with you. I mean, that's great news, right? So you may have estimated your school to be less than it is. And they're going to come back and say, no, let's do another inspection and let's start looking for some outstanding, because we think you could be. So that's amazing. Alternatively, they will look at the evidence you've collected for good, and they may disagree and say it's not strong enough evidence. It tells us you're on your way to good, but it doesn't tell us you are good. So we think that you're inaccurate in your evaluation of the school, and we think you're more likely to be inadequate. So what they do is they check how accurate your judgments are, and their judgment is on the back of that. So they only know what you tell them. If you want them to know you are brilliant in maths, then you need to show them and tell them you're brilliant in maths. You do that in your SAF, you do it in your data, you open your maths books, you talk to the maths lead, you make sure that you push maths into their face. Every ounce of evidence you can find, go, look at all this. We think we're great, and we want you to agree with us. And they will or they won't. But if you don't tell them, you don't show them, they've got no evidence, and therefore you're not.
I see. So this SEF, how do you propose that teachers prepare for this Ofsted? I mean, how long before the Ofsted do you prepare the SEF?
Yeah, good question, because most people say to me, I am going to have an Ofsted, I think, in the next 6 months. I'm due an Ofsted in the next 6 months. Can you help me prepare? How do you collect evidence from the last 4 years in the next 6 months? That's not possible. So if you are expecting an Ofsted in the next 4 years, start collecting your evidence now.
Right.
And I would also say with a SEF, a lot of people write their SEF on a piece of paper, a Word document of sorts, and they break down the areas that match up with the framework, and they say, our quality of education is this, and we think it's good, and so on. And I would say the only problem you're going to have with that is when the inspector says, show me your curriculum progression, show me your sequencing, show me how you work with the staff to see your reception to year 6, step by step by step by step in that subject. How are you going to do that with paperwork? What you're going to do is you're going to spend 2 hours in your office going through every folder in your cupboard and desperately rifling through pieces of paper. I'll tell you here and now, as soon as an inspector walks into your building, you lose all sense of logic. You lose all sense of memory. There's no memory anymore. You can't remember where anything is. You don't know what you did yesterday or last year. You don't know what your name is anymore. And you want everything right in front of you. We also know that evidence rarely comes in paper form in a school. It's more likely to be something a child said, something a child did. It'll be video, it'll be photographs, it'll be quotes that children said.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right, so we have to remember that they will look at anything if it's ready for them to look at. If they have to sit around for an hour and wait, they won't. So get your photographs, get your videos, get your quotes, and bank them in one place. And be really, really clear in your filing system where those things are. On the SOS website, I have an audit there that I've put on the website to help head teachers. And the audit is about 220 statements. And if you subscribe to the audit, you can audit your whole school, all the areas of your school, but you also then drop in your evidence so that it's all held online. So you click into the statement, Ofsted might say, how are your vulnerable children doing? You click into the statement about vulnerable children making progress, and all your evidence is sat there.
And it's all there ready.
Right, you have to rely on your memory or your filing system. So I made that especially for head teachers, so that you have everything ready every minute of every day. Because what I want head teachers to do is to go and look after your staff and children. Stop preparing for Ofsted 24/7. Don't give up your year before they're due to just keep revamping that Ofsted file. Stop. All you need to do is chart everything that you're doing in your school in a really methodical way, in small bursts regularly, and the rest of the time spend it with your children and your teachers and building that culture and that ethos.
So if you're working with the SEF over a period of 4 years, there is not really any need to there's not much preparation that's needed.
No, you're just charting everything you do.
Got you.
So
you're just looking for evidence so that when Ofsted are there, you said, okay, everything's online, everything's ready. Now I just got to get together some of the kids and just show off.
Yep.
Right.
Exactly. And that's exactly what I told my children. We are going to show off and show these inspectors what we're made of.
So that's why you like Ofsted coming in.
Love it, because I'm always ready. The thing is that we see things every single day. I mean, there's such joy in working in the school. Children come out with the most bizarre things, the funniest things, and the most intellectual things when you least expect it. So, and we sit there and we go, wow, what an amazing thing that child did today, or what an amazing thing that child said today. And you go home and you tell all your family, and you go in the staff room and you tell all the staff, and everyone says, oh, wow, amazing. And then tomorrow is another day, and it's another child, and another wow. But where have you put that evidence that, you create the culture and ethos, and you are educating that child, and it is because of you that child feels safe to say what they're saying, and that deep thinking that they're offering you, and these insightful comments they come out with is simply because of the education you're providing. But where have you kept that evidence? It's all in here in your memory, and that's gone. That's gone when Ofsted walked through the door. You don't have that.
You're absolutely right. No one's going to remember, these inspiring moments and these quotes.
No.
And over a period of 4 years,
No.
that would be crazy. But how often would you advise teachers to update their stuff?
I would say, when something happens, for instance, you might have a staff meeting doing moderation. At the end of that staff meeting, go and log all that into the computer and then go home to bed. That's done. When a child does something amazing, take a photograph, take a video, write down what they said, put it in, go home and go to bed. You don't have to worry, because you are really slowly and carefully building an immense amount of evidence that tells those inspectors, I have so much evidence for you, I'm going to highlight the best bits for you, and the rest is there for you to look at as you see fit. And if they feel they need more evidence, because they're not completely convinced you are where you say you are, they'll go and start digging into your evidence, and they will seek, trust me, they want you to get the grading you want. Right. They're not against you. But they get frustrated when head teachers say that they're good or they're outstanding, and there's just no evidence there that says that. That's very hard and frustrating for an Ofsted inspector. So let's work with them. Let's give them tons of evidence to choose from that says, because of that, and that, I'm going to agree with you. Yeah. I'm not worried about the other 20 pieces of evidence, because actually this is strong enough. Yeah. Or, this is good evidence, but have you got more? Yeah, I happen to have another 50 pieces here, all saved online. Brilliant. I'm sure you'll find something.
Yeah, absolutely. Where's the governor's role in this with Ofsted?
Yeah, good question that, because governors tend to stand on the periphery and sweat a little, and then they have to be interviewed by the inspectors to see, do they know their school? So in other words, the head teacher's saying the school's good, the teachers are saying the school is good, but do the governors know if the school is good, and if so, how are they good? So they're going to see if the governors know what's going on. Again, having an audit and a collection of evidence, if the governors have a sign-in to just look at that whenever they want to, there's nothing they don't know about your school.
So they can log in whenever they like?
Yeah, I mean, the audit will just draw down reports for them, so they'll always know. You don't have to have the audit, that's not a necessity. I only created it for heads who think that would be helpful. But for those who prefer to work in paper, that's absolutely fine. But what I would say is every half term, I would inform governors any changes, anything you're doing, any celebrations, any areas that you're working on. The less they know, the less they can support you on Ofsted Day, the less they can prove that the school is what you say it is. If you think your school is good or you think your school is outstanding, your governors have to believe that, they have to know that, and they will stand right beside you and sing the same tune. And that's what Ofsted want to see. So give your governors tons of information. Just keep it coming, and just telling them, just letting them know. It's not expecting anything in return, to be honest. If you have an audit, it's great, because then they know exactly which areas to question you and which areas to celebrate with you. So it's helpful in that way. But if not, it's just a matter of drip feed lots of information to them.
So you were talking about more hints and tips for teachers.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to give you a load of hints and tips now. One of those is make sure that your staff know that they can come to you at any point during the day and they can tell you what they're seeing, what they're hearing. The reason you want this, the reason you need this constant dialogue all day, and keep checking in with your staff and children, make sure you've got that dialogue coming, because if you find yourself in a situation where you have to complain, as I did, I was very firmly advised, please do not send us a whinging email, because it will just be filed in the bin. Now, I know a lot of head teachers will be furious after an inspection and send an email to the head office and say, I'm not happy with how the inspection was handled. Shockingly, they call that a whinging email, and that gets filed. Okay, that's not a complaint.
I did want to ask you about this complaint. What is the difference between a complaint and a whinging email?
Okay, so a complaint is you are going to tell them that you are going to submit a complaint, okay? So you will tell the senior HMI, I'm not happy with how things are going, I'm going to log a formal complaint. Now, there is a certain protocol, that, like anywhere else they've got a complaints policy, follow it to the letter. So you have so many days, you must send it in within 10 days, okay? But I would say when you put your complaint letter together, do not put any emotion in there. Do not say, I felt this way and I felt that way. As I said before, they're not responsible for your emotional literacy. They're not responsible for your sensitivities. However, what they are responsible for is following the rules, okay? So that's the only thing you should have in your complaint. They should have done this. They didn't. They did this instead. Okay, they did this, yet it clearly states in your code of conduct that shouldn't happen. So be very, very clear and very factual and relate everything to their paperwork. And the only paperwork that you can relate to from your school is your own code of conduct. You might even use the safeguarding, your safeguarding policy that says, you know, why you ask someone to leave the premises. You don't have to throw out an Ofsted Inspector to write a complaint. You might have gone through the day and then you've sat down at the end of the day, you've talked with staff, you've heard some stories about how they felt intimidated or how the inspector didn't behave appropriately, and then you've decided to do a complaint. That's absolutely fine. But remember, you only have so many days to do it in. So the first thing you need to do before everyone goes home is sit down and ask the staff, tell me what you saw, tell me what you heard, and tell them not to talk in emotional terms, just factual. What he said or she said, what was seen, what behaviours were seen. How you felt's irrelevant. So write all that down. The only one time I mentioned about how I felt was when the girl cried, because I made it very clear that the girl who cried when he asked to speak to her, she is one of our tough cookies, and she was in year 5. She's very sporty. She's not an emotional year 5. She doesn't fall out with girlfriends, She was emotionally a very, solid and sound girl. And we never see her cry. She never cries. She's just one of those children who just doesn't cry. I think the last time I saw her cry was about year 1. So for her to cry to us was quite shocking. So I felt, because of her reaction, it was such a strong reaction, that was really a measure of how she was feeling to me. So I did use that as an example. I also used the example of the little boy who was mute and the way he insisted on him reading. I did talk about how that made me feel that as a head teacher and as a SENDCO, I had allowed him to put that child in a very difficult position. And I felt that I'd failed the child. And he insisted that I had no choice in that matter. And he was wrong about that. I did have a choice, and I do have a choice. So other than that, facts only. Stick to the facts. Follow their complaints policy. They will then issue your complaint to an investigating officer who will go through everything. Now, as a measure, my complaint was 17 pages long.
Wow.
And I had quotes from every member of staff and every governor. We had a huge meeting, and I made sure every single person in that building had a voice. And I put their voice in that complaint, just to prove this isn't me being a sensitive head teacher who doesn't like being told my school isn't great. As it turned out, they did agree with my judgments. But anyway, if that was the case, I wouldn't want them to think that. I wanted to make them see this affected everybody in the building. We're not all sensitive people who can't be told we're not brilliant, but we were all affected, and that's the measure, isn't it? You know, whereas if it was just from me, they could easily accuse me of being a little oversensitive. So it's really important to get everyone's voice in there.
I see. So comprehensive, there's no such thing as too comprehensive, I suppose.
No, not at all. What shocked me was the senior HMI made it very clear that he was happy to receive a complaint, and he wasn't pushing for a complaint. He wouldn't have been that crude. However, he did suggest that I might like to share the day with him in a more structured way other than an email.
What does that mean?
Write a complaint. So I did. I wrote the complaint, I sent it in, and I had the full support of governors and staff and parents and children and everybody. And that's really important, that you're really open about what you're doing and why you're doing it. The senior HMI decided to come and do the inspection. So he came and did the inspection a month later and disagreed with everything the previous inspector said. And he was amazing. The senior HMI was absolutely brilliant. It was such a good inspection. I got to show off my school. He did lots of digging. He found evidence I wouldn't have thought of, and he helped me in putting it all together. And he agreed with my judgments. So that was fantastic. It was a great outcome, and it was fair, and it was respectful, and it was superb. So the complaints were upheld, as they should be. But actually, the other hint and tip I would give is when I spoke to the investigating officer, she said to me, I've never done this before, and whenever I receive a complaint, I don't generally give feedback on the grammar or English structure of a complaint. However, she said this is an exceptionally well-written complaint, and if all head teachers followed this format, we'd be able to deal with many more matters more effectively.
Right, okay.
So my other tip is make sure your complaint is absolutely thorough. You do it step by step, and you go through everything, go through the day, do it chronologically if you want to, but don't, and stick to the facts, absolutely stick to the facts, but make sure your sections are well defined, break it up into bite-sized chunks for the investigator, and be really clear and concise. Again, I've got an example template that anyone can use on the website. It's there. And again, I've gone and done lots of keynote speaking around for clusters of schools, branch meetings for the unions, and it's to give this away, because all power to head teachers, and all power to Ofsted. I say to them, let's work in partnership with Ofsted, and at the start of the meeting, and they go, clearly she hasn't had an inspection. And it's like, do you know what I have with some of the best inspectors? It's the odd one who have their own agenda, and we have to work together as a team. And I can assure you, what I did find out is Ofsted want to work with us. They want us to help them carry out a really good service. So let's work with them.
Sounds positive, especially if you've got the governors on board too. And I think if you can create that kind of culture where you're looking forward to it, they're looking forward to it, they're gonna see all the brilliant stuff that's in your school, all the hard work that you've done, and you're going to put it in a nice, easily digestible format for them in the way of a CEF and hopefully not a complaint, but
yeah, hopefully it won't lead to a complaint, no. So again, when I put the complaint in, I referred everything to their paperwork. So I spoke in their language. So basically I went through their framework, their handbook, and said, you say this, he did this. You say this will happen, that didn't happen, and so on. And that's their language they speak. So they couldn't really argue with that, that's how it was. And there wasn't any sort of sensitive people whinging. We didn't have any of that. So lots of hints and tips there for when Ofsted are coming. We know that they'll start their inspections again after Christmas sometime. People will start to lose sleep again, and I'm saying don't lose sleep. They really want to see your evidence that proves you are what you say you are, and know the rules of play. Keep your head held high and be proud of what you've achieved, and prove it, and prove it, and prove it.
Okay. Let's say I did have an Ofsted inspection coming up, possibly in 6 months. What's the first thing I do? How do I, as in, I haven't done my 4-year prep.
Yeah.
6 months is looming ever quicker. Time is flying. Is it too late? What can I do? Who can I speak to?
Never too late. Okay, so the first thing you should do is build a picture of your school. So know where your school is, what's good, what's not good, what's outstanding, what practice is great, what isn't, what needs working on. You'll have done a school improvement plan anyway, so you'll have some idea of where your school needs to build on its successes. But you need to know your successes. You need to say, this is what we are here, this is what we are here. So your SEF is really about where you are today, and then your school improvement is where we'd like to get to for next year. This is how we're going to do it. And they're the only 2 documents really you need, because you'll have your data analysis in there. But we know that Ofsted are much more focused now on head teacher wellbeing. That's a huge one. And staff wellbeing, and the quality of education. So it's not all about data anymore. So don't go filling folders with tons of data. Start filling your folders or your online SEF audit tool or whatever. Start filling that with quality of education, the behaviour and attitudes of everybody, including the children. How do people feel coming to school? Do they like it? Are they enjoying it? Do they get experiences that make them say, wow? And if that's happening, you need to be logging that. Not all your data drops every 2 weeks.
Absolutely.
That's where we used to be. We're not there anymore, thank God. Now we're much more focused on the children loving school and learning. Not testing results all the time. They back up what you're saying. What they're saying is, you're saying we're having a great time, we're giving a quality education, and we can prove it because our children do well academically. But they're also very happy and they want to be here. And they're making a difference in their lives. So you have to kind of do both, really, in equal quantities. So another tip would be get everybody involved. Delegate a task to everyone. Everyone can do something. So as a head teacher, what you're doing is you are collating all of that information, but it's your staff who are bringing it to you. But not just your staff, your children are. So if you want to know what friendships are like and what happens when people fall out on the playground, get your children to tell you that. Get your children to log that. Tell children, I want this information from the playground. I want this information from your friendship groups. I want this information of when you're working with a group at a table and you all get a bit stuck. What do you do about it? I want that information. And get the children to find that information for you and bring it to you. So they will become ambassadors of different areas within the school. They collect the evidence. You've got your school council. And so everyone's busy. Everyone's busy finding out about their school and then coming and celebrating with you, going, do you know what? This is really good. I asked 20 children if they've ever been bullied, and they said no. And then I've asked another 5 children, and they said they were once, but the teacher sorted it out. So I've got all this evidence that we're a really good school and we have hardly any bullying at all. Amazing, great evidence, can't knock that evidence, get it logged. That's what you want. You want to be saying, not only am I saying we don't have bullying very often, there'll always be bullying because children do, but how do you address it is what they want to know. And that's going to come from the children. So get your teachers to log those wow moments in the classroom. Get your teachers to take videos and photographs of the children making things, drama, singing, all of that, musical instruments, PE and sports. Get it all on film, log it online, collect that evidence. The teachers will do it, the TAs can do that. Your TAs can get SEND evidence to show SEN children do really well. They love learning, they love coming to school, they're emotionally safe, they're high in self-esteem. Well, your TA is the perfect person to collect all that evidence for you.
What you're suggesting really is to try and create a celebratory environment where you've got TAs, you've got pupils, you've got teachers that are looking at the school, finding what are we good at, what do we like doing, how good are we at it, and then let's log that, and so then they can pass the information on to you. Is that where we can start?
Absolutely. And one of the reasons you want to do that is because when the inspector goes around and asks lots of questions of the staff, all staff, they will be very quick to share what they collect. So if they say, oh yeah, no, I'm really in charge of well-being of children and behaviour and so on. And it's great because, over the last couple of years, I've been really charting how we've moved forward in that. And they'll be able to talk really enthusiastically about how great the school is. They all will. It doesn't matter who they talk to. All the staff will be telling the same story from the same book. It's all the same narrative. And then the inspector will come back to you and say, wow, we're all on the same page here, aren't we?
It's like a storybook of how brilliant your school is and how brilliant the pupils are and how brilliant the teachers are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some of the best evidence you will get is through media now. My school's completely come away from marking, and that's a whole other podcast. But we don't do marking. So we have to collect evidence of success and progress in other ways. And I think we have to think outside the box and say, how else can we know that a child is making progress? And their book is one way. Just one way. And the inspectors were not thrown in any way by the fact that my books had little work in and they weren't particularly marked. So a few bits were marked, but we didn't really do any extensive marking. Most of our learning is outdoors, so they don't take their books outdoors. So therefore much of their writing was actually on iPads and filed away on an electrical system. So the inspector said to me, the second inspector, a lady, she said to me, do you know, there's not a lot of work in your books, in your children's books. I don't see extensive writing. And I said, no, you won't, because they do write, but they also type, they do research, they electronically keep all their research, and the reports that they produce are generally electronic. So I could show her some iPads and some children's work. But the best way to find out about children's learning is to talk to them. And she did. She went and sat down with quite a few children from different year groups, talked to them about their learning, asked them to explain what they've been learning, why they've been learning it, how's it going to help them in their lives. And of course, the children had loads to say, because they always do. And she came back to me and she said, you may not have a lot of writing in your books, but those children are very, very knowledgeable.
And that's the goal, isn't it?
Right. So stop filling up books and stop marking them for 8 hours every Sunday. Again, that's not a podcast. I'm not going to get my soapbox about that.
We must talk about that.
But I think, when you are collecting evidence for Ofsted, please stop thinking you need test results and you need books filled with writing. You don't. Stop it. What you need is evidence to prove you are what you say you are. And just think about all the different ways that you can collect that evidence. And it's not always children sitting at tables writing.
Brilliant. I don't think anyone could have said it better. Now, kind of wrapping things up, what's the next step for you then this year?
Well, this year I'm supporting primary schools to change how they're teaching, how they're assessing, changing marking policies to feedback policies for a start. But just looking at how the teaching and learning has to move into the 21st century. So I'm helping schools to completely revamp first of all, their teaching and learning. This great book here, which I can talk about on a podcast. Another great book, Hugh Roberts, Oops, he's my hero. And then we've got Paul Dix, When the Adults Change, Everything Changes. These 3 books are just a combination of some of the best teaching and learning and ethos and culture within your school. So I'm working on bringing schools up to the 21st century and making them very, very different places, because I want schools to prepare children for their futures and not for the 1950s.
Right, perfect. We've got so much to talk about, but we can't do it all tonight. So let's have another chat. I really want to talk to you about marking. You mentioned marking.
Yeah.
Well-being as well, staff well-being.
Oh, huge.
I really want to dig down on that.
Yeah, huge.
Some of your ideas. So let's plan some ideas.
And curriculum, change that curriculum. We'll do some work on that too. Yeah. Brilliant. So all of these things. Let's get our schools to the 21st century, and my podcast hopefully will give you some hints and tips on just subtle things that you can change to get your school there.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
It's been a pleasure.